Hi, welcome to session 4, and we'll be looking at identifying vulnerabilities of WhatsApp groups or the marginalized groups or the poor, and how some analysis of inequalities can be done uh, since equity focused evaluation or gender responsive evaluation lies on identifying and addressing those inequalities or iniquities within the process. So, key questions: what is intersectionality? We look at the concept of intersectionality. We look at why it is important for equity promotion in evaluation. Look at evaluation with the gender lens and why gender analysis is important for gender equity and development. So, equity focused interventions or evaluation must begin, as Bamberg and Segon say, an analysis of the context in which inequity operates. In the previous session, we already looked at some of the factors associated with iniquities. So, equity focused evaluation can look at analysis of the extent in which inequity operates to inform the design of programs and interventions that are tailored to address the local causes and consequences of inequities. So, in other words, that before we go ahead and look at all these evaluation processes and designs that are focusing on addressing these inequities and inequalities, it is very essential and fundamental that we try to understand contexts within which these inequities operate, and therefore be able to understand how we can address them through evaluation processes, but also intervention processes. So let's begin with the concept of intersectionality. So intersectionality looks at the intersection of multiple forms of oppression lived by WhatsApp groups. So in other words, we looked at in the previous session, when we were looking at the overview of equity focused and gender responsive evaluation. The whole idea was that the aim should be able to address the inequities and therefore address it towards achieving equity and empowering girls and women through evaluation processes and intervention in general. So the whole idea is that we don't just look at a group as it is or regarding one factor, but we look at many issues that actually make these groups worse off. So in this session is mainly looking at analyzing all those different aspects of communities or society that keep the worst of groups at a disadvantage. So intersectionality is an approach that looks at studying all those multiple forms that disadvantage particular groups. So the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, gender, as they apply to a given individual or group, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discriminating and disadvantaging these groups. So that's how the Oxford dictionaries define intersectionality. So we are looking at the different categories. So, for instance, while we say women are disadvantaged, but not all women can be disadvantaged similarly. So an example is if you look at a black American woman or an African American woman who stays in a poor community, does not have a job or have limited access to other opportunities, um, and is therefore poor, is in that case that woman is experiencing an intersection of many factors that keep her in an advantage, in keep her in a disadvantaged position. So there are intersections of gender, race, ethnicity, socio-economic statuses such as class or caste, if you, for instance, refer to Indian or South Asian religions and so on. So in the next slide you will take a look at the illustration to see how those intervene or converge to do that. So the problem is to when we do universal categorization of, for instance, gender issues, we risk an idea of excluding other women who do not fit in the universal category as women, because women also have subcategories, not just they do not just have a homogeneous kind of categorization. So you can see the examples of how those intersections come in. So you have race, you have ethnicity, you have religion, you have language. For instance, one might not understand the language, that puts them at a disadvantage. You have immigration status, so refugees have, in addition to the fact that they are refugees, they are poor, they are women, they don't have a job, they are of different religion, they are of different race, they can't speak the same language, they do not have occupation, they live in a specific geographical location, they are young or adults, they so they do have all those characteristics that keep them at a disadvantage. So you cannot definitely. So what we're saying here is that such a refugee woman cannot, should not be uh, categorized as any other woman in a specific location. So take an example, if we are considering refugee women, they shouldn't be categorized, refugee women in Uganda should not be categorized in similarly as all other women in Uganda, because for them they have another category of factors that influence, that put them at a more disadvantaged position compared to these other general women. So that's what intersectionality is all about. That approach that looks at making sure that you have several categorization based on these different factors that influence one to be at a disadvantage. And of course, these intersectionalities are associated to iniquities that could lead to gender discrimination, ethnic discrimination, discrimination due to disability or due to poverty, or due to immigration status, or due to geographical isolation or cultural or social norms. So all these are categories of iniquities that would result from those categorization of intersections of factors that keep an individual or particular group of people at a disadvantage. So some of the key issues to consider when we are talking about gender and intersectionality is that intersectionality can be used for gender analysis, but it's not to offer not to offer the question, the answer to the question before us. So in other words, it's just to take a gender analyst deeper into other factors, but not necessarily to answer what the gender analysis question would be about. And intersectionality approach can also be is also for reflexivity purposes. So it's just against the new universalizations approach, such as, for instance, from a positivist perspective, where quantitative statistics is used to generalize for particular groups. So in this case, we go back to more of a constructivist or interpretivist perspective to reflect on a researcher, but also on other categories of those who involve those who are participating in the research process or evaluation process. So the issues posed do not mean that vulnerable or marginalized or worse off groups in many places are not in the context of oppression or exclusion. No, not that. But we are all saying that while you identify one group, then you should be one should also go ahead or deeper to recategorize them so that they can be able to identify whether there are other factors that are related to the iniquities that are being experienced. So, in other words, yeah, we are looking at what that identity politics. Okay, what is it? What are those factors that make one identify themselves to belong to one category or the other? So, Kapilashilami and others in 2016, in their article, they argue that intersectionality, that from an intersectional perspective, that there is a need to revise the view that social relations are experienced as separate roads. So in that case, in that case, it would be the idea that while those separate while social relations are experienced by some groups differently, yeah, it's better that sometimes, yeah, one needs to look at those separate roads in a way that they can identify those other lenses. And their need, the idea of rejecting or rejecting reduction of people's reality to one category at a time, but also recognizing multiple positions and their link to structural inequalities, and therefore, in that case, would reveal which structures of inequality enable or limit particular possibilities that one group can indeed enjoy. So we use intersectionality to analyze how power operates at intersections of multiple structure positions to influence high levels of inequalities and iniquities among particular groups, including women, men, boys and girls, people with disabilities, and so on and so on. So, but we also use intersectionality to analyze intersections of positions and how they enhance inequalities. So you have oppression and deprivation of vulnerable groups from enjoying or participating in development processes and outcomes by these particular intersections of positions. So being aware of those intersections would therefore help us to understand the iniquities and inequalities that are associated with the experiences of these groups, and therefore be able to well establish and integrate such equity and gender responsive strategies within our evaluation processes. So again, I've already talked about this in the two previous sessions about what Martin says, that we need to interrogate, to have evaluations that interrogate different versions of realities based on different intersections of factors, such as positions of gender, income, disabilities, deafness, religion, race, ethnicity, and so on. So when we apply evaluation without reflecting on these different versions of reality, we miss the idea of having of understanding why intended outcomes and unintended outcomes are experienced differently for different groups. So that is the whole idea for interrogating or using intersectionality. So the bottom line for on intersectionality is that intersectionality is more than just a methodology. It's just a way of analyzing the complexity of people's experiences, but of course, but not connections of identities. So you should just note that it's just not about how identities are connected. It's just about analyzing how different people's experiences are complex and therefore again not similar in that way. So we risk to have wrong assumptions if we generalize one category, that one category is more relevant than the other when it comes to our evaluation processes. So therefore, intersectionality gives us that advantage that we can be able to look at different groups or individuals and dig deeper to understand why they experience such iniquities in terms of participation in interventions, but also in terms of experiencing outcomes of development processes generated from our different interventions. So, gender, again, socially constructed differences and distinctions between men and women. We are bringing gender again here because first, it is part of the intersections of part of those intersections that one must look at that come with iniquities, because since gender is socially constructed, it comes with those distinctions or differences in terms of attributes, statuses, roles, and responsibilities between men and women, and therefore gives an idea of how we can bring in a different lens or approach of looking at whether men and women experience development outcomes equally or not. So you have, for instance, here you have a manager in the office saying we plan to pay you less than the men, but it will all be in CRISIP, new Harriet Tubman 20. So an idea that while men and women do the same work, they are paid less in some cases because of their gender identity, them being women. So also evaluations risk being blind to gender issues, or they risk being gender insensitive if they fail to identify or acknowledge the differences based on gender and how these differences structure opportunities, entitlements, and how women and men are constrained from participating in or benefiting from a particular intervention. So on the upper right side, you have a picture of a management committee, but it is specifically made up of men. And then you have in the same picture on the left, you have women with children participating in the activity of, or the role of fetching water, and so on. And so the water management committee, in here you have a man who is, you could assume he's a Muslim also, who is stating that women are too busy to discuss water issues. But indeed, you can see that they are too busy doing what is being discussed. So that renders this committee to be gender insensitive. If, for instance, you have this your evaluator here who is putting on brew, and is the one who is indeed conducting an evaluation committee on water management in a community, then this evaluator risks to be gender blind, because he is indeed ignoring the actual users the actual users and the actual users of water, in, if we may say. So here you have another example of gender insensitivity, where you have these if you could, we could also name them as evaluators who have come to this community with some high tech. So you have this evaluator saying, so first of all, you see water is 35 kilometers ahead, and then uh, so the evaluator is saying this mobile app will help you to map and monitor key water points. But I like the way this, because the response here is that we did carry the water home, meaning that, of course, while the evaluator is more interested in applying, in using his mobile app to help women on mapping water sources, he is forgetting that, okay, even if the women map the water source, they are still challenged on getting to the water source to get the clean water. So that is all being gender insensitive and gender blind. uh, there is, of course, gender aware, which is very important, that uh, if evaluators are gender aware, then they are uh, they are acknowledging and appreciating uh, uh, social and cultural differences between men and women, and therefore looking at how the differences affect one's privilege or responsibilities and access to and control over resources. So, in other words, when evaluators are gender aware, they have the ability to appreciate that gender differences exist, and therefore in most cases, of course, undesirable, and therefore the evaluation processes can also should also be able to factor in the gender lens within their evaluation processes. Yeah, we've already talked about the gender responsive, because indeed we are looking at gender responsive evaluation or gender sensitive evaluation. So in the cases of gender sensitivity or gender responsive evaluations, there is some high level ability by evaluators to recognize that gender differences exist and have implications, and therefore take action to respond to bring out the negative and positive implications in the evaluation processes. So there are many gender issues that can arise from implementation of different projects that we tend to evaluate as evaluators, but and we need to understand those gender issues, because if we cannot understand the gender issues, then we risk the idea of missing information within our evaluation processes. Missing information, missing how we engage different respondents, and therefore missing the idea of interrogating the different versions of realities, or counting the values and realities of different subgroups. Okay, yeah, so Yeah, there are so many issues. If you take an example here again about water, you see these women coming from fetching water, and one of them is saying, "Okay, we have to travel long distance to fetch contaminated water," and then the other one saying, "Imagine sometimes I feel like we carry disease to our own family." So issues here may include, okay, long distance to fetch water, but also again the kind of water that is being fetched is also, so those are gender issues. You also have, for instance, there's an issue regarding abortion. One is saying abortion rights are shrinking, reading newspaper. Another one is reading, yeah, sorry, not specifically newspaper, but a document that has information. One other says harassment at clinics when we go. I mean, maybe it could be that when they go for healthcare services, and then another one is using. You can see the electronic gadget there. Also, another woman is reading that my employer has a say about my. Does the employer have a say about my birth control? And then you have this religious man, or not necessarily, I'm just assuming, or Muslim, so you can just assume. We are looking at identities here. So saying that, look, see, this is exactly why women shouldn't read. So there is an issue of abortion, there is an issue of harassment, there is an issue of employment rights, but also an issue of access to information. So all those are gender issues. So we refer to gender issues that they are those that arise when there is inequality or iniquity or bias, and the needs of one of the gender are met at the expense of the other. So in that case, manifested in gender discrimination, exploitation, and sometimes even leading to gender-based violence. So it is very important that evaluators can take into consideration of these issues while they are planning to do evaluation, while they are designing evaluation methods, while they are planning to analyze, but also um, to report. So now that we've looked at some of the key issues that have reminded us what how contexts are and how we should look at them, then one asks, of course, evaluation. We look at evaluation with a gender lens. So a perspective based research. So gender based research with gender perspective. So I've embedded this video on. It's just I think about 3 minutes to give you a definition of what gender-based analysis plus is. GBA plus, also known as that. What it is, and of course looking at the idea that while interventions are being implemented or evaluated, one needs to go beyond just one categorization of group, that of gender, but looking at how different development processes may affect the different categories of people, including gender. So the question there would be whether it is important to do to engender research or engender evaluation or not. So that would then lead us to the idea of gender analysis. So when we're doing gender analysis, of course, there is an idea that one must consider disaggregated data. So sexual disaggregated data looks at the process of having data that are collected and analyzed separately on males and females, and yeah, women and men, or girls and boys, um, so that uh, the true pictures of one group are captured and then giving a particular perspective on how they are experiencing different aspects of development. So here we are only saying sex desegregated data just because we are looking at gender, but you can also have desegregated data based on other intersections of groups and different factors that are doing so. Okay, so uh, we do the advocacy is for sex segregated data so that we avoid the issue of generalization, which most quantitative statistics do. That if there is a percentage of high, for instance, that the project has been able to reduce high incidence of malaria after distributing mosquito nets, the question there would be whether both men and women or girls and boys have the same experience in this reduction. Okay, so to have disaggregated data gives us a picture of the different experiences of these of men and women, or females and males. So the whole idea is always about the details. It's not just about numbers, it's about the details. Okay, so gender analysis in this case gives us the idea that we must do systematic uh, identification and classification of different differences between men and women. Could be differences in terms of access and control over resources, could be differences in terms of benefits from the interventions, or could be differences in terms of opportunities and constraints related to the intervention, but related on how men and women are experiencing them. And of course, gender analysis also looks at critical and systematic examination of those different aspects, and then not just uh, about how the search would affect the project, but also how the outcomes would be experienced by men and women, including even their participation within the intervention itself. So, in other words, it explores these differences so that policies and programs and projects can identify and meet the different needs of men and women. So evaluation in this case, if it is done before the project is implemented, then that evaluation can also include such gender analysis protocols to help understand the situation for both men and women, so that while implementation is happening and after implementation, even impacts and process evaluation can also capture the kind of differences in terms of experiences of such interventions. So gender analysis is in one way an answer to some of the key development issues, such as the different needs or priorities or experiences and interests or views of women and men, or in terms of who has access to or control over resources, since interventions are run by resources considered inputs in this case. So the question would be then, who has access and control over such resources? If, for instance, again, there were cash transfers given to a household through an intervention of, I mean, social security giving cash transfers. So the case would be who has access to, who can have high access to these cash transfers and control them, and even have the power to influence how those cash transfers would be used, or who does what and why and when or where. So, for instance, in the example that we looked at, for instance, of the UNICEF regarding how to apply gender lens in data collection during evaluation, looking at who does what or when. For instance, the who does, if one finds out, does a gender analysis and finds out that women are in the garden during morning, therefore a sensitization project should not be targeting women, shouldn't be carried out during that particular time, or even evaluators might miss out information if they do not uh, uh, design evaluation processes or collecting data during the time when women are free from their other domestic chores. So you can see how important gender analysis is. So, but it also gives us the information of who is likely to benefit or lose from our new interventions that we are putting across. And gender differences in social relations in terms of power. So gender analysis is also helpful in identifying how inclusive interventions can be done, or inclusive evaluation can be done to have all men, boys, and girls, and women to have equitable experiences of these interventions. So it can be applied, can be used at various evaluation levels to inform different kinds of interlinked processes during differential impact of course, regarding the differential impact of development processes. And therefore the gender analysis does not only happen during analysis of evaluation information, but it should happen from all evaluation at all evaluation levels, which can be before the project, or during the project process evaluation, or after the project when doing impact evaluations. But also it is applicable to gain ideas on how gender relations will affect the achievement of intended development goals within the interventions, and therefore should also be able to help during evaluation to look at those how those intended goals are being experienced differently among different groups. So it's also useful when designing development projects, and of course designing the evaluation protocols, and can be best applied in all stages of the intervention, but mostly early stages of identification, design, planning, and so on. So you can take a look at this video at your own time, and see how, for instance, gender analysis is done for a forestry development planning, and see how such uh, can inspire you on how to do to do a gender analysis for your own projects or at workplace. The purpose of gender analysis is, of course, to understand the different experiences, identify the gender-based experiences in access to and control over resources, but also can help us to predict how different groups and communities will participate or gain from the different initiatives, and therefore having such information would be a basis for a better design for an evaluation that would capture such different realities of different groups. But of course, it also helps in a way towards achieving the goals of effectiveness, efficiency, equity, empowerment, and so on, such that we can have reliable information and credible information regarding all those evaluative criteria, in terms of what kind of information can be produced on each criterion. But this can also be analysis can also be used for training packages, developing training packages to sensitize different staff, maybe staff or on a project on how to be gender sensitive. And again, it's a basis for planning an initiative that has realistic objectives and activities related to gender equity. So you have also again an example where you have gender analysis is done for conflict, and then you have some examples of why gender analysis can be an example in rebuilding communities that are affected by conflict. So if you have time, you can take a look at this. So all these videos are embedded in your Moodle. You can have a chance and look at them. Yeah, so when we talk about gender analysis, yeah, we are looking at awareness of the mutually influencing relationships among gender and development. So, saying, in other words, we are saying that gender affects development processes and outcomes, but also development processes may affect um, uh, gender. It could be affecting it positively in terms of changing the status quo or creating unintended outcomes that are actually increasing the gaps between the worst of groups and the better groups in communities. So in that case, when we're doing gender, that when we're doing gender analysis, just as any other research, there are frameworks that are useful for understanding the roles and other differences between men and women within communities. And some of them include the Harvard Analytical Framework, the Mozart Gender Planning Framework, Women's Empowerment Framework, gender analysis matrix, and of course social relations framework. So we might not get into deep of this, but yeah, I would implore you uh, to look at each of these frameworks, and you can see how you can apply them for different project designs and implementation. But the whole idea here is to bring about the issue that while you're planning to do evaluation, then you need to begin with understanding the context and the context within which the gender inequalities and iniquities are experienced, so that you can gain an idea on how to approach the designs and implementation of evaluation. Uh, the gender analysis can also be done in organizations. Of course, it's not just about the intervention, but it can also be done in an organization. Of course, the basis is, for instance, if we are saying that an evaluation team must be gender balanced or must be gender sensitive, then the organization itself must be also related to such issues. So in this case, gender analysis can also be used to do uh, to understand gender issues within organizations or project management, if you may. So gender analysis in organization is a gendered human resource management in organizations. Of course, key some of the key issues is to be considered are gender relations in terms of power between men and women in management or staff, the positions or power relations, for instance, male evaluators versus female beneficiaries, or female evaluators versus male beneficiaries, some such kind of considerations, or gender issues such as GBV at workplace, or sensitive to organizational policies towards gender, if whether they are gender sensitive or responsive, or whether they are gender blind, so such issues. Yeah, so in that case, we can say that yeah, engendering evaluation, yeah, it's very important that we must have sexual aim at having sexual desegregated data, but of course that's just not enough. We need to understand what kind of desegregated data, should it be quantitative or qualitative, or both, and we are going to look at these the methodology in session 8. But the whole idea is, of course, whether we should triangulate to capture all perspectives in terms of context, which is a best practice, that while we ask all women It's not just about asking all women, but we can ask women with disabilities, women with other factors, or women, refugee women, or women with other factors. Again, think about the intersectionality approach, so that you can capture all the different perspective or realities in your evaluation. So the bottom line here is that gender analysis is not just about numbers that depict the situation, but it's about going beyond to dissect the whole numbers to establish the critical differences between men and women, and asking why such situation is like that. So understanding why such situations are like that then gives you a bottom line for later measuring what kind of changes that might happen or not. So the whole idea is to have effective to make sure that we will generate evidence-based information regarding our interventions from a gender perspective and equitable perspective. So of course, so policy analysis from a gender perspective, you could have take a look at the discussion on gender integration in your organization or workplace activities, and see whether your organization is gender sensitive or responsive, or whether it is gender blind, or there are gender issues that need to be considered in that case, and how you can be able to address them. So these are some of the resources you could read that would help you to understand intersectionality, but also issues of gender analysis. Thank you. That marks the end of the session. Uh, yeah, but of course, or more giving more clarification, these resources give you more information on gender, on intersectionality, and these would give you more information on gender itself, but also the application of different gender analysis tools and so on. Thank you.